Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Sokol, and I would like to talk to you today about twice marginalized students and what we can do to ensure a more equitable educational experience for our non-Hispanic English language learners. I teach at a high school in Fairfax County that is majority minority, and most of the students are in fact Hispanic students. Our school has done a great job of outreach and inclusion for our Hispanic community. As a result, our students who are English language learners and culturally diverse learners that are not Hispanic are marginalized a second time because they have all of the difficulties of learning a new language without the support that's given to our Hispanic English language learners. And so it can appear that we are not as interested in their success as we are in the success of our Hispanic students. I've included the 2015-2016 demographics for my high school. You can see that in the last school year, we were 48% Hispanic, 21% Asian, 20% white non-Hispanic, 7% black non-Hispanic, and 4% other, which would include a lot of our Northern African students. It should also be noted that Middle Eastern students, which would include all of our Arabic speakers, our Farsi speakers, and many of our Kurdish speakers, would be classified as white under the Fairfax County system. So even white non-Hispanic includes culturally and linguistically diverse learners. At our high school, we have a very strong culture of Hispanic inclusion. When flyers are made to advertise clubs and events, when banners are made, students and faculty make them in both English and Spanish, and the flyers are distributed throughout the school, not only in the English as a second language hallway. So Spanish and English are seen all over the school, every type of sign, whether made by Fairfax County or by students and teachers at the school. Um, our announcements every day are in English, but some announcements, especially ones that are of particular concern to the Hispanic community, are repeated in Spanish. We have two wonderful parent liaisons who are from South American countries themselves, and so they really understand the culture of our South and Central American students and the language. So they serve not only as translators and help us to get in touch with parents who are not available during our working hours, but they're also a wonderful resource for us as teachers in learning to understand where our parents and students are coming from, and also in helping our families to understand how to help their students be successful in an American school. Our faculty and staff also are representative of Hispanic cultures. We have administrators, teachers, guidance counselors, and also many other support staff and administrative assistants who are Hispanic. And so our students see multiple models of successful people who come from backgrounds like them and who look and talk like them. The same cannot be said of our Vietnamese, Korean, Middle Eastern, Chinese, and Northern African students. So what can we do and how do they see themselves? So what I'd like to do is take a second to look at a Kahoot to get us all thinking about what our classrooms look like and do these students see themselves in our classrooms? So I'm not actually going to answer the questions, but in order to let you see what the questions are, I'm going to just enter in this Kahoot. Okay, so this is me. Okay, so our first question is about the number of English language learners that are not Hispanic you might see in your classrooms this year. And I gave you a few options. Okay. Okay. Our second question is, what resources do we use contacting these families? Do we just email them in English and hope for the best? Do we use Google Translate to email? Do we use our parent liaisons even if they don't speak the language? Or do we use our students as translators? Do we allow our students to interact in non-standard English? Not at all. Only other forms of English, English and Spanish, or allow my students to speak whatever languages they are comfortable with. Okay. Are there positive and accurate cultural representatives in your curriculum? Do you not know of any? Are you not sure if the representatives are accurate? Only one or two? Or do you supplement your curriculum regularly? And lastly, do you explicitly teach power discourse? Do you think that's only for English and history? Do you feel that students should already know this? Do you do this sometimes? Or do you make a point of doing this on a regular basis? Okay. These are some of the things that we need to think about when we're teaching students who are not part of the majority culture and also don't speak the dominant language within our school. Some of the things that we need to be concerned with, including language, is what type of language is used in our basal resources. This could be anything from the use of active versus passive voice to pronoun use to references to American culture or Hispanic culture that are not going to be familiar to students from other parts of the world. Is it always true that the West is referred to as we and the East is referred to as they? Do other people participate in arranged marriages while we choose our mates? Are people from cultures that are different than ours portrayed as being traditional or lacking in something? Do we always include all of our students and multiple cultures as being equal even though they're different? Names are very important. When we make up our word problems, when we're looking at examples, when we're finding texts, do we find things where all of the names are American or Western names? Are we using Hispanic names? Are we using Arabic names? In a certain story or a certain anecdote that you want to tell, if it doesn't make a difference what culture or background somebody came from and you're just telling a general story, use names that are culturally representative of your students. Equally important is agency. Are people from Arabic backgrounds, are people from Northern African backgrounds portrayed as succeeding despite the conditions that they grew up in because a Westerner stepped in and gave them an opportunity to go to a Western school and learn our way of doing things? Or were they successful because of who they were and what they chose to do? At the same time, is it true that every white person or every black person or every Hispanic person who became successful did so by making good choices, even though they were poor, they knew education was important and they did the right thing? Or did they sometimes get help from people? It's really important to make sure that we give a balanced view. People from all backgrounds have been successful due to their own work, and people of all backgrounds have gotten a helping hand. Um, the use of first language actually supports second language proficiency. It's an unfortunate misconception that students are only going to get better at speaking English if they are only allowed to speak English. Students make meaning from all language, and if they're allowed to use their first language to support them, they're much more likely to translate skills into their second language. Along the same lines, meaning making is multilingual. Students who speak multiple languages do not think English in English class and Arabic at home. They think in both all the time. Allow students to take concepts and ideas from one culture and apply them to the other. Take words from one language and use them in the other. Going back and forth between languages is not a sign of deficiency, it's a sign of proficiency. They understand the concept so well that they can use it in multiple contexts. These students understand concepts in multiple languages and they understand them using certain words from certain languages better. So allow students to use their multiple languages to make meaning of content. When you have stories or pictures, it's really important that The students should be represented, not just students who have Arabic names, but students from the countries and socioeconomic levels and ethnic groups that are actually in your classroom. Using outdated, biased, and stereotypical examples, stories, and pictures is harmful not only to students who are from the backgrounds being portrayed, but it's also harmful to the students who this is their only exposure to these cultures. We need to be authentic, and our actual students need to be represented. When looking at resources, be aware of the author's assumptions and perspective. Read carefully. We may notice biases and be able to anticipate certain perspectives that an author is going to have, but our students won't necessarily know that. It's important if you are reading a poem with your class that you explain to the class who this author is, what was their background, what type of an environment were they living in when they wrote this. First, it will help them understand the poem itself. Second, it may explain some of the biases and some of the opinions and why they're so different from those of the students. It's really important that you make these biases and perspectives explicit because even our English language learners don't always notice those subtleties. But I assure you, our students who are already swimming in cultural references that they don't understand are not going to be able to make this meaning. Some recommendations that we can use in our classrooms to help all students to feel included and to have an equitable educational experience are to mix our grouping strategies. It's important to allow students to speak a common language. If all of the students in a group are proficient in a language, let them speak the way they choose. Also, while it is important to group students who have similar language and culture to allow them to help each other make meaning out of material, especially complicated ideas, it's also really important to have your students interact with people who are not from the same cultural and linguistic background as them. The only way to broaden our horizons and to help everyone see both what we have in common and how our differences and our different approaches to problem solving can make all of us stronger is if you are required to work with people who are different than you. Encourage translingualism in your classes. Translingualism is the use of multiple languages when you're discussing and evaluating an idea. We often refer to Spanglish. This is a good example of translingualism. You're choosing certain words from one language along with words from another language, going back and forth in a way that makes sense. Um, Students can do this with each other. They can do this in journaling. They can do this with you. If they use a word you're not familiar with, ask them to explain that word so you understand, but allow the students to use their multiple languages. It will greatly increase their understanding of the content. It will also help them to feel more accepted. And students who feel more accepted and who feel valued for who they are much more motivated to succeed. Um, we also need to explicitly teach sociocultural references. Don't just leave students to try and figure out what Central Park is. If a story is referring to 9/11 and you have students who are recently immigrated from Northern Africa or the Middle East, they have a very different perspective of what happened in this country on September 11th, 2001 than we do. You need to explicitly teach them what we were feeling and what that author was referring to. If you are able to and you have an alternative resource that's describing the same event from a different perspective, expose both students or all of your students to both perspectives and explain where the other side was coming from. At the same time, it's really important to honor the home behaviors and response patterns of our students. Students who are used to working together as a community, to helping each other out, to breaking up tasks where everybody does what they are best suited to help each other out, Allow students to do this while at the same time teaching them the skills they're going to need to be successful here in this country. Explicitly teach them how to work on their own. Explicitly teach them how to work together on the same problem rather than split up problems. You do this half, I do that half. The same is true for response patterns. Students who at home don't speak to adults should have that honored. Do they need to learn how to talk to adults? Yes, they do, but not every response needs to be oral. Allow them to write. Ask them to write first and then read what they wrote. This will get them used to speaking with adults while at the same time being more comfortable because now they're just reading something, not talking back to an adult as it might be interpreted in their home culture. Journaling can be very powerful. First of all, you can allow students to respond as themselves to content and how it was presented, whether this is agreeing or disagreeing, whether this is responding with emotion or a cold analysis. Allow the students to respond. Another good thing to do to help everyone to gain perspective is ask the entire class to respond from a certain point of view that is different than the author's point of view. That gets them to think about the content, and at the same time, it helps them think about how somebody else sees the world. Lastly, you can ask each student to respond from a cultural identity that is not the author's nor their own. Have somebody respond in a way that is completely different from how they see the world. Have them randomly grab from the hat a description of a cultural background of other students in the class so that everyone is responding as they think somebody else in the class would see things. Put them in each other's shoes. Give them an opportunity to empathize. And ask them to share from these journals, all three types. Lastly, you want to invite students to code switch in both directions. Rewriting their own work into standard English or textbook English is a common exercise, but asking students to go the other way and translate standard English into their own home discourse patterns is very powerful. It still shows fluency in both languages. It helps the students to realize that even though academic language sounds very different, the ideas that are being put forward aren't that different from the ideas they think about in their daily lives. So what I'd like you to do right now is to talk to the other people at your table and discuss an upcoming lesson or unit that you're going to be teaching, and look at how you can incorporate some of these strategies into that lesson or unit. At the same time, I really want you to think about how these strategies not only help your non-Hispanic English language learners, but how will they help your Hispanic students and your monolingual English students as well. Some of the things that were brought to my attention is that this can be very time consuming for teachers, that some of these strategies that combine our school literacy focus with these cultural literacy can actually create teacher buy-in at some schools. Many of these students are already successful, and a lot of people don't realize that translating from standard English into street English actually requires a certain degree of fluency. So some of the things that I learned is that language is power and we need to use that power carefully. Classroom teachers have to include all cultures in our instruction. English-only policies will inhibit student achievement both in content and learning English. Plurilingual and pluricultural education starts with me. Every teacher makes a difference. We don't have to wait for the schools to hire people from every background for us to do our part to welcome and include all students. Students who feel included have increased motivation, and while they may be successful because their parents expect it and will not use language and cultural mismatches to explain away lack of success, you want the students to feel engaged and a part of the school, and the only way to do that is to honor and recognize their uniqueness. Thank you.